Hey, folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Interviews. I'm Arlyeon, and we're here today with Tristan Riven. Did I say that right?
Yes. Hello.
Your last name makes me think of like the Myst sequel. I just
Oh,
I just
yes.
caught that now.
Another good game.
Who's part of Devespresso Games, the developers of Vambrace Cold Soul, as well as the Coma games, plural. More on that later.
Thanks for having me.
It's actually a pleasure to have you here, and I'm glad you took me up on the interview. Now, to the viewers, if you watched these interviews before, we kick things off informally to get people just to know the folks who are behind the fun of the games you love. That said, for the folks who are impatient and are just looking for game deets, just feel free to check the screen for a hint on when the mechanics get mulled over. But, back to ice-breaking questions all. First off, what's your favorite game or genre of gaming?
Yeah, I have a handful of games that I probably consider to be some of my favorites. Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, Metal Gear Solid, the original for PlayStation, Earthbound, Secret of Mana. Maybe
Yeah.
one thing that, yeah, one thing that all those games have in common is that they're very narrative driven and very much focused on the story elements of the games and character building. So I would say that those games played a huge role in my life, especially in my early years of gaming, and inspired me in terms of how narrative comes into the play of games, and how I can look to that whenever I'm working on my own projects as well. Yeah, so probably those early games.
That's fair. I'm actually sort of a little bit curious of if you dived into Seiken Detsu 3, like the Secret of Mana sequel we didn't get until technically
Oh
recently with
yeah.
the remake.
I played the game a bit on emulators back in the day, but I was super excited to hear that it just got released, and it's definitely on my to-do list. It's one of those things.
Same.
Since I've become a game developer, I actually spend much less time playing games, unfortunately. And there are a lot of things on my backlog, but that is one game I've been eyeballing a lot lately. So I think as soon as my schedule frees up, I'm going to be visiting that, revisiting it.
Fair. Yeah, and also guilty. Same. Like emulators when I was young. But um so you mentioned you're like fairly busy with game devery and such, but are there any games you have been distracting yourself with lately?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, one that I've always been I like to revisit from time to time is FTL, Faster Than Light. It's one of my favorite games.
I'm so
It's another
trash at
game.
it.
Yeah, me too. I'm horrible at it, but it's a game I love. I love its replayability factor. Um, in terms of games that there are games that I'm also looking to from that same publisher, Into the Breach. I've been wanting to play that a lot lately,
So
but
good. So good.
yes, I've been enjoying what I see of it. So if it's uh, as addicting as FTL is, then um, I should probably stay far away from it for the sake of my productivity. But the last game I really spent and invested a lot of time in was Breath of the Wild, and yeah, a little more time than I should have as well. Like the game was just very immersive for me. I just love how it took Zelda back to its roots of open world exploration. So spent a lot of time with that.
Did it was it too much time as in a golden poop level of too much time or
Well, I unlocked all of the costumes and beat all of the shrines, and um, I'm trying to. The only thing I did not do in that game was collect all of the coral. And so I think there are some people that really love the collectathon aspect of the game, and the Koroks definitely add a really cool level to that. I'm just not into that aspect of it. But I think it's a testament to the game. Like my wife, Keiko, she's Japanese, and she doesn't play a lot of games very immersively. But when we got Breath of the Wild, she immediately got into it as well, and she beat everything as well, unlocked all the costumes, beat all the shrines, and if it can get her hooked, I think it's doing something right.
Fair. I'll admit I haven't actually dived into a lot of new console things because just PC gaming has been more accessible with me. But like that was one of the
Hmm.
games where I was like kicking myself for not having that I mean, it's usually the Zelda games that actually make me kick myself for not having like a Nintendo console.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm also one of those guys. Just for the past decade, I've kind of been off the scene. I'm missing a lot of really cool games here and
Mm.
there. Things like Red Dead Redemption. These are like the AAA games that I eyeball a lot. And then some of the newer GTA games and stuff like that. Just play here and there, but. Uh, yeah, there's some, and even a lot of the previous games in the Zelda franchise, I just happened to miss them. And I'm really glad I didn't miss this one. It was, um, they did something really cool with it.
This is actually sort of relevant to open world bits, but back when I was like first poking at you about the interview, we ended up on the subject of tabletop gaming. We actually briefly touched on it again today.
Mhm.
How long have you been into the hobby and what systems have you played? And partly also just sort of curious to see just how relevant it was to Vambrace since you mentioned that.
Well, by tabletop gaming, do you mean like the pen and paper RPGs or like board games in general?
You
So,
know, we can go both. We can go both.
mhm. So tabletop, when it comes to the pen and paper RPGs, I think the last time I ever played one of those was actually um, very sadly in high school. It's something that I live vicariously through other people, just watching them play on YouTube and stuff like that, and wish that I had a proper social group around me that I could play with regularly. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But it is something where I love studying the systems. I love reading up on those things, and because as a game designer myself, it just stimulates the imagination. I'm more into the board game scene. That is something that I recently got into, and I think that's I think most people have been board gamers most of their life, but a lot of people these days are just kind of getting into this new advanced scene of board gaming, which is kind of springing forth. And I think is a very exciting place to be right now. A lot of the new, it's funny enough. The game that I got started with was Zombie Side. I happened to be in Singapore of all places, and I happened to walk by a hobby shop, and they had this zombie sideboard set out with all the, one thing that's really nice about the game is it has lots of really cool miniatures and stuff. This was like probably back in, I want to say it was like 2013 or something. And I've been walking by and I just saw the board laid out with all the miniatures. Looked really cool. I got curious about it. Ended up purchasing the game and then collecting a lot of the new supplemental releases for it. And then we had that was kind of like my little gateway into the larger scene of board gaming. So in some ways, I kind of got a late start, but soon just became a huge fan of games like game designers like Antoine Balza. Uh, the guy he designed a game called Takedo and a few other really nice board games. Um, yeah, so that was like kind of my gateway into it. I was staying in Malaysia for a while and had a lot of friends that we made it a regular thing to play board games. And I don't have a lot of time to do it these days, but I do like to collect my board games.
Did you have a preferred poison for them?
mm, the game that we we often revisit it. There were two games, and this probably shed some light. I always lean toward narrative-driven games, always, whatever the platform. Um, I really loved Tales of Arabian Nights. Have you heard of it?
I haven't. To actually
It's actually
spoilers, like the familiarity I have with board games in recent years has been Arkham Horror, Mansions of Madness, and Betrayal at
oh
House on the Hill.
yes, okay. So Betrayal, I would rank Betrayal in my top five. I know like a lot of people, have some opinions about how well designed that game is. I love that game. I always have a blast playing that with my friends. So Betrayal, Eldritch Horror, really love that. I always like to set the mood with some like noirish music, and then you know get the dice rolling with that game. The other one I want to say, yeah, Tales of Arabian Nights. That, funny enough, that game's actually from the '80s.
What?
Yeah, it's an older game, but it's a story driven game where basically all the players are gathered around, and your job is to have the most exciting adventure. Sounds kind of funny. You're passing this book called the Book of Tales, kind of from like the 1001 Nights,
Hmm.
around the table. And the really cool thing about that game is every time you play, it's going to be a completely different experience. Like the Book of Tales is like over 1,000 pages long, and so
What?
and yeah, it's huge, absolutely huge. And so when you're playing the game, uh, you have these encounters, but the encounters get randomized to a certain degree depending on where you're at and which encounter in which specific location you roll, and then you can respond to the encounter usually in like from like 1 to 15 different ways. So there's like just a great degree of diversity in the player experience with the game. It's insane. But the game, yeah, it's like from the early '80s. I don't know if they've done any reprints of it, but I love that game.
That sounds like
Check it out.
more expansive than like Betrayal, and Betrayal had like a ton of different permutations, and that sounds more diverse.
Oh man, it can't be compared. Like Betrayal would be less than 3% on the story elements of this game. That's not knocking Betrayal. Betrayal does what it does really well, but it's a lot more on rails, so to speak, than Arabian Nights.
We've talked a bit about like your fondness for gaming in a few different mediums. I was wondering if you could both tell me a bit more about yourself as well as what led you to getting into game development.
Yeah. Well, if I go back to the very, very early days, that would probably be when I first started gaming. I've been a lifelong gamer, and it's always been, for me, as much of a part of my life as it was just a hobby. So if I go back to that, but the time, I have this very specific memory of it's kind of funny. I'm just like going back to my days in elementary school when I actually told my mother like I wanted to be a game designer, and then I was gonna do that someday. I guess there's a part of me that never really even took that very seriously. But uh, there was a very specific moment when I decided to just commit everything I had going forward into trying to make that happen. And I hope people don't laugh at me for it, but it's like when I was playing Mass Effect 2, and I had just been, I was like in a bad place at the time. I just quit a job. I had was kind of stewing in my apartment in Seoul, South Korea, for a long time. Been playing through the Mass Effect games, and I just played through Mass Effect 2, and I was watching the credits roll. And I was so immersed in that world, so immersed with the characters, the story, um, the way that the story could unfold from the way I was like leading my campaign and the decisions I was making with my characters. I was so into it, and I was so into the world building. And when the credits were rolling, you know, I just felt so overwhelmed by how great that experience had been. And at that moment, I was like, all right, I really want to make games. I want to do this. I want to make experiences like this for other people, or at least strive to give people the same feeling of joy that I had felt through that campaign. Um, and a funny fact is that Minho and I we had both just quit our jobs. We were working together previously for a games media company. There was a lot of drama. We were just coming out of that. Really long story short, I ended up talking to him and saying, look, we don't know anything about game design or making games, anything like that. But why don't we just drop everything? Join me. Let's try to make a game. And see if we can do it. And so around 2012, we really jumped into it and committed ourselves to trying. And we made every mistake in the book. There was definitely a time when we were getting close to our goal, but it was just out of reach. We ended up scrapping the project. Minho went. We were staying in a place called Kota Kinabalu in Sabah, East Malaysia. It was
All
a really
right.
nice place, yeah. But we ended up going there because the cost of living was a lot lower. I have a house there, and it just makes it easier to focus on game development when you have more time to, more of a runway to make mistakes.
Don't have to worry about
And
the roof over your head.
yes, and there was a lot of stuff that we had to figure out. We kind of arrogantly underestimated the stuff that we had to figure out.
Which, if you don't mind me asking, like, what sort of skills did you end up needing to learn for the game development, and how and where did you end up developing them along the course
Oh
of
my
this?
gosh. Yeah. Just we basically went into this as complete blank slates. We didn't
Tabula
even know how to.
rasa.
Yes, totally. Completely tabula rasa. Didn't even know the fundamentals of interpersonal communication on a game design team, development team. So,
So
I
game
mean,
design documents weren't a thing.
we like the most functional of game design documents. Very Spartan, very like those things. I mean, literally everything we had to learn from the ground up, and we never had any guidance about it either. In hindsight, I think that actually worked out to our benefit because the fact that we were able to stumble through all those mistakes gave us some really hands-on experience about being forced to figure out very quickly what worked and what didn't work, what was helping us make progress a lot faster, and what was hindering us. And every time we bounced into a new wall, we had to dig in our heels really deep and just figure it out. Literally, all of our games to date are based in large part on all those early failures. We went to Malaysia in 2012. A lot of things fell through when Minho went back to Korea, and then we decided to kind of scrap the project. But there was a good 2 to 3 years where those plans, our initial plans, didn't really pan out. But you know, everything we kind of learned from that, we used it in the development of the Coma. We continue using it today with every game that we make. We've also kind of discovered there's a rhythm of working together. And I think a lot of small teams end up figuring this out. I don't know what it's like on larger teams of 50 to 100 people, but with a small, intimate team like ours, There's this kind of rhythm that you figure out, and you learn a lot about each other in the process.
Which, I mean, on that subject, you've talked a bit about the team in Devespresso games. Like, how did you come to meet everyone and work with these other folks?
So my first experience meeting Minho goes back, I believe, that must have been 2009 or 2010, somewhere back then. I used to teach English in South Korea, and so I was working at an adult language institute, teaching as an English instructor. And they had this common area where you could get coffee and kind of chill out with the students and just free talk with them about their day and their work. And I happened to be walking by this table one day, and I saw this guy sitting there by himself, sketching. And he had this huge portfolio next to him that he would keep his work in. And I literally just happened to have a coffee and be walking by at the moment. And I just saw what he was working on and stopped. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. And that guy turned out to be Minho. And, I said, can I buy you a coffee? Because, like, I was actually working on a story at the time. And the work that he was doing perfectly matched the kind of art that I wanted to have complement the story I was working on. So, I invited him out for a coffee, and then we just sat there, and it was like immediately we were clicking and sharing all these cool ideas, and we just stayed in touch with we had stayed in touch with each other ever since. I eventually moved over into games media, and then one of the first guys I contacted was Minho. I asked him if he would like to join me. I needed an artist for a team I was working on, and he joined. That was our first experience working with each other. We ended up leaving that company together. As for the rest of the team, there are four guys on the team. It's myself, Minho. He does all the art, all the animation. His brother Hyunho, he does all the sound engineering, sound design, composition, stuff like that. And then their cousin Minchun, he does all of the programming for the game.
It's
And
actually
he's
a
a
really
really
tight knit group.
yeah, it's a very tight knit group. My favorite joke is I don't know like what was in the water their family was drinking, but there's just like a lot of talent there. And Minchun's a really young guy. Like Vambrace was his first game ever. He had no experience making video games before Vambrace, and he was still in college when he started working on it.
Huh.
Had never touched Unity, the game engine, before in his life. We already had some files with the Coma, so we just kind of gave those to him as a reference to check out. He looked at it. He's like, "Yeah, I'll dig into this, and in about 2 or 3 months, I'll be ready to start working on it." And yeah, he just started, digging around in the data that we had for the Coma, and he used that as a reference. And we have a bit of our own know-how that we brought to the table, and it all just clicked, and he started working on Vambrace. And honestly, for considering it's his first game and he was still a student when he started working on it, I feel like he knocked the ball out of the park on his first attempt.
That's actually pretty impressive for like the background there. I am actually really curious, by the way. So, what's the origin for like the name for Devespresso?
you know, uh, until today, we've never had a central office for where we do all of our work. So when we were living in Seoul, we were all working out of cafes. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, and so development espresso. Like every day, we were just like fueling ourselves with coffee and literally making games from cafes. And we weren't even working out of the same cafe. We were so lazy that we would just work from whatever district and nearest cafe we happened to be at. And so if we just happened to be like passing each other by, sometimes we would all kind of converge at the same place. But yeah, that's where it came from. Funny enough, we just got an office in Seoul, and right now the interior designer is doing some work on the place. But yeah, before that, it was all you know.
Is one of the rooms a coffee shop?
Yeah, yeah. We were good patrons, we, but yeah, it was just one of those funny things. And we, when it came to the Coma, we didn't even know if we were going to finish finish development of the game. We just kind of put everything on hold and just stumbled through, a development phase, uh, and managed to get it out there. So it honestly just felt like a miracle when we actually finished the game, and we thought all of our troubles were over. Then this is how it works, right? In the industry, you finish a game and then you just put it on Steam and you're good to go, and you don't have to do anything else. Um,
Yeah, that's entirely how it works, especially for indies. Yeah.
Yes. So what we immediately did was take our finished game and, without doing any sort of marketing online, just uploaded it to Steam and threw it out there. Yeah. Um, we were, as you can see, we're still very much in the business of making big mistakes and learning from
I mean, as long as you're able to like learn from prior experiences, both good and bad, I mean, I'd say it's not too bad. Stumble
them. Well,
here, figure out
yeah.
the way to improve. It's good. It's fine.
Personally, for us, we definitely learned the importance of having a good publisher in your corner.
So we're sort of winding down the end of like the personalist questions, but I did want to ask because at this juncture there's been a lot of focus on mental health for people in the game industry as creators, as developers, because things like crunch and everything have become sort of ingrained. And inversely, I've gained a sort of interest in what people are doing to counter that, to develop healthy
Hmm.
practices. So, in your case, do you have any tips or practices you do to mitigate the stress created by like being a developer? And is there anything that you folks as a studio do or strive towards for the well being of like your compatriots, especially since you folks are so tight knit?
It's a very yeah, it's such an interesting and controversial topic, and I think like the element of variability that comes into play, is just like how every developer runs their pipelines, how tightly they stick to their own scheduling, and then how well the teams work together so that you can avoid you know um, unforeseen circumstances in the development. Now, I don't have the experience of working in a really large team. So typically, we've always been working on this really small team of four, where everybody's kind of forced to wear a variety of different hats. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for what you have to ship. And then if you don't do that, everything grinds to a halt, right? And so everybody knows who to like point the finger at and shame. If something's been kind of dragging on. But that's our unique way of doing things, right? And and things just don't get done if somebody's not delivering. And so we I think it really helps to just love what you do because, frankly speaking, with the way that we do things, there's just been an unavoidable level of crunch that comes into play in some regards to the development cycle. There are times when I'm just a bit behind and I just have to dig in and produce. Just sit around the clock and work on getting that dialogue finished. Or when Minho is just completely strapped for time and he has to, he's also running a lot of different things. He's the CEO of the company, but he's also doing animation and art for the game, which is an incredible burden. And I think the thing, I can't speak for the other three guys. I can speak for myself and only as a player of this small team. I think the thing that has really lent itself well for us is to like really love what you're doing to a degree where it ceases to feel like work. And I know not everybody has that benefit. So I don't know what kind of advice aside from that I can provide, because every game development team has a different sort of system going on, a different way of working together. But it does concern me whenever I hear stories about people that are in these situations, and yeah, it's a difficult balance to strike. The real world logistics of trying to make something as complicated as a game. I always like to tell people that making a game is like synchronized swimming. Everybody, at the end of the day, you've got all these different elements coming together, and they've got to like form into this like really complicated, cohesive, interactive experience for people to enjoy. That is a really difficult thing to do, even with a small team. I can't imagine the logistics of doing it on a much larger scale. But that's also not to, condone some of the practices that are currently common in the industry. But I am aware of the difficulties on both sides. I guess as a business owner, but also as a developer in that business, you have to experience both sides of the coin, right? So it's a complicated topic.
All right, so we've dealt with that. So I suppose now we ought to get into the nitty gritty. Generally, we've already been talking a bit about Vambrace, but more or less indirectly. I was wondering if you'd be so willing to provide our current audience with a sort of short description of what you'd consider Vambrace Cold Souls.
Yeah, so I would characterize Vambrace as a roguelite fantasy adventure game. The synopsis is you take on the role of a adventuress named Avelia Lyric, and you journey into this cursed city and meet an underground enclave of survivors who are leading this desperate campaign against an entity known as the King of Shades. And from that point on, it's your job to assemble teams into expeditionary teams and to journey to the cursed surface of the city on these strike missions and complete those campaigns in which the story unfolds a little bit more. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I would consider Vambrace.
It's actually a lot of effort for me not to just like sputter out "Vive la résistance," but actually
Yes.
pretty appropriate. So how exactly did Vambrace come to be?
Minho, in its earliest incarnation, it's been kind of a part of Minho's headcanon for ages. I think it goes back to elementary school when he was scribbling and drawing characters in the margins of his notebook, and then he started to kind of create this universe that all these characters inhabited. Eventually, he had assembled a collection of sketches, notes, and stuff that had fleshed out a very, very rough idea of what this world was like. He even had this like pretty vibrant online community that were contributing characters to this universe he was creating. And so it had been something Minho has been working on since probably as far back as that, but as early as 2000, year 2000.
Hmm.
Yeah, and when I came into contact with him, he just had a kind of a pile of sketches and notes. It was a really huge set of just. It looked like kind of pre-production material. But the thing was, they didn't really have a kind of unifying. How
Narrative
can I
thread.
say it? Yeah, a unifying narrative thread or a cohesiveness to the world building. that I thought was necessary to really establish it as a universe that you could immerse yourself into. So it was definitely a very personal work for Minho, but he had all these really cool ideas and all these notes and more than enough creative material for me to kind of sift through and look at and kind of start forming these ideas behind. And he gave me, when we start working on it, I told him like, you know, I do want to work on the narrative of this game, but the narrative's got to be my own thing. It's got to be kind of my interpretation of your world, and I want to do your world justice. I want it to feel like what you've been working on, but an extension of that with my own spin on it. And he loved the idea, and I guess it's a testament that we can work so well together on it that he gave me something so personal to him and trusted me to weave a narrative from all those elements together. But in its earliest incarnation, that's where it really came from.
So we're actually already sort of touching on a bit of this, but like Vambrace has a rather distinct art style. In part, a lot of it is Minho's work you've mentioned, his sort of
Hmm.
aesthetic, but both for the game itself as well as for the different ancestries that populate Icenaire, is there anything that influenced the art as a whole, as well as things that may have served to inspire the sort of different fashions and everything that, the various peoples who inhabit Icenaire sort of
Yeah.
like they all have a very different flavor to them? I was rather
Hmm.
curious about what the influence or inspirations for those were too.
Yeah, I'm sure Minho could talk about this for ages, and so maybe I can just touch very lightly on some of the basic aesthetics of his work, just that I was involved in. But we make it a point that whatever we design, we want it to have some deep roots in that world. Like things need to have a reason. So if certain people dress this way, there has to be a reason why it's like that, or there has to be a cultural. It has to be an extension of the culture from which they came and stuff. We knew that the player would be revisiting this kind of underground city, and that was going to be their main hub of operations. And so we thought it would be really interesting to cram all of these different people into a very tight space and kind of force them to, force the player to see that these people were had to get along together in these very dire circumstances. But we also wanted each of the factions in that underground place to like clearly reflect how different they were. In the larger world of Vambrace, there are different countries in which these factions hail from. Uh, for example, we have the Foxier, and they come from a land called Asadal, which is it's kind of an island country. Asadal is actually a romanticized name for the Korean peninsula. Actually, it's
I
kind of
was
like
like,
Alp.
man, that fashion when I was in their
Yes.
quarter, and I loved it. They had my favorite outfits.
Hmm. So exactly what I told him. We often see a lot of Japanese elements, cultural elements, woven into games and stuff like that. I would love it if the Foxier, which are this kind of maritime merchant group coming from this island country, if they had these, if you could weave some sort of fantastical traditional Korean elements into, their design. Uh, and that came down to the naming of the characters, the way they look and stuff. And so that's like an example of where Minho drew some inspiration for one of the factions. Other characters like the Naziri, which are this desert dwelling uh, race. I think there was a bit of influence in terms of culturally from the old from fusing together some elements of like old Persian culture with kind of a Dune-esque aesthetic, kind of the Fremen desert suits. I
Oh
think that's what
God,
it's called.
yeah, the
Yeah,
Fremen.
yeah. So we wanted to have elements like that in there. The dwarves are kind of more of a Scandinavian, have some Scandinavian slash Viking esque influences. But I'm really horrible at, yeah, aside from speaking on the art narratively. I know that Minho's really functional with the art, and he wants them each to just have a very dynamic, very vivid aesthetic. Each group, and I think he did a great job with that.
So, changing tacks, like the music in Vambrace is pretty distinct. Do you have like a track that really resonates with you?
Um, I love one of my favorite characters in the game is Feroza. She's kind of this henchman,
The sociopath.
the sociopath. A lot of players have lovingly dubbed her Nicki Minaj because of her suit. But that's funny. But she's one of my favorite characters. I particularly love her track, which is called "Dance with Death," because it it's such a good reflection of her character. Everything from like how unpredictably the piano piece plays with that particular track, to the chaotic elements of her personality, how well it matches the chaotic elements of her personality. That's one that I particularly like. There's another track called Golden Skies, which we had the great pleasure of working with a lady called Emmy Evans. She's a really famous vocalist who lent her voice to a game called Near Automata.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
when you beat the game and you hear that song, that's her singing. So that also has a close place in our hearts. And it was really fun working with her. Um, yeah, I also really like the workshop theme
Mm, mm.
with the golems and stuff like that. But we almost didn't release a soundtrack. We really wanted to make sure that the game and the sound was properly mixed and mastered. So we also had a really great time working with Norihiko Hibino-san. Um, he he's really famous for his work on the Metal Gear Solid soundtracks and Bayonetta soundtracks.
Damn.
And yeah, he mixed and mastered all the tracks that we have, except for Golden Skies. Actually, that was done by Hyunho himself. So yeah, it was actually it was Hyunho is not in his. I have to say, it was a real challenge for him because he he's an EDM guy. He's really into electronic dance music. That's his jam,
So
and
this is
so
very far from his normal cup of tea.
it's completely removed from what he finds natural. But he really did it, man. It's a fantasy game. He had to completely change the way he made music, orchestral compositions and stuff like that. And you know, we just wanted to do it justice. So we sought out an opportunity to work with Emmy Evans and Norihiko Hibino. Thanks to Scarlet Moon Productions, we were able to get in touch with them. And yeah, I think that they really gave a really cool life to the soundtrack that immerses, people that listen to it. They can definitely feel the world of Vambrace when they hear those tracks.
Fair. So the outfit system is a pretty large part of Vambrace, not for any reason mechanically, but just because there are so many different outfits that you're able to just sort of acquire through quests and plot decisions and
Hmm.
other odds and ends throughout the game. Was there ever a point where the outfits had mechanical effects on like the player other than like the quest rewards you can get from the quest?
we had we had discussed that for a long time. I think the only there are 26 costumes in the game that you can unlock. The only one that actually has that aspect would be the Tantini. It actually gives you a slight uh, merchantry buff or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but
Wait, for
you
just
know,
wearing it, not counting the
no, you. It's the only one that you can also equip as a relic as well.
I wasn't counting equipping as a relic because if you go into New Game Plus, you don't maintain that relic,
Mm,
but you have the
yes.
costume.
Hmm. Yeah. So if it's just the costume itself, no, we there in the early days of development, we did consider trying to work in some extra, stat boosting elements. But at the end of the day, we just wanted to reward players with something aesthetic for the characters, for a little reward for completing subquests and following different branches of the story as it unfolded.
Rip my hopes of having one of the end game costumes do something to make the next run through easier.
It might be something at a later point that we work into the game.
Oh yeah, which is your favorite outfit too? Because I'm like as a Dally, 100% with the auger being the next.
Hmm.
The auger ending was the one I got.
I like the cat suit.
Fair, actually.
Yes. I also like the Sailor Lunera suit.
Oh God, really?
the
I mean, it's adorably Anu, but also like it's
Mhm.
why I can't wear it for long.
uh, we also have a little homage. This was my personal idea to Samus
Mm,
Aaron. So
the
I
what it suit, the
the
mm,
carbon suit.
carbon suit. Yeah, there's also this
Yeah,
giant polar bear suit, which
that's Minho's idea. I don't know. He went wild there. That was
I
so
think it's in
random.
the review. By the way, it's just like just a bow and arrow running around the giant polar bear suit.
That was really fun. I also like the Queen of Shades. Like that, I think it looks pretty badass.
I don't have that yet, but that's like goals, I guess.
Mhm.
Have villain suit. So yeah, maybe something to look forward to there, but for the moment, definitely aesthetic. And so here's my question: Is earlier we mentioned the tabletop. We've touched on this a bit. You've mentioned that sort of had an influence on Vambrace. I was wondering if you could clarify about that influence of
Oh
tabletop on
yeah.
Vambrace.
Um, See, this is always where I kind of wade into awkward territory because as a developer, as a game designer, I'm watching a lot of people's reviews and stuff like that, and so obviously, I know a lot of people are inclined to, and understandably so, compare Vambrace to Darkest Dungeon. And I think that people have that inclination because of its due to its aesthetics. And I do think that Minho, who's a fan of Darkest Dungeon, definitely had some influence in that arena.
Also,
On the game,
ironically, it was
yeah,
also influenced by tabletop.
yeah. So that's the thing is that as a as the game designer, um, the game had much more influence just from first of all, I have probably about 20 minutes of experience playing Darkest Dungeon. And if I have to speak to the game design of Vambrace in its earliest incarnation, I had mocked up this, very rough tabletop version of the game. We were experienced enough with the development pipeline to know that if we just jump directly into making the game, it's going to be a really painful experience for us.
By
So
tabletop
what,
version, do you mean like board game or pen and paper?
like a little bit of both. So I'll get into that. So first of all, it was a kind of board game. So you can imagine that each district, like we had the north, south, east, western districts, had been kind of laid out with these pre-made pathways to get to the boss stage. And so we had this kind of board where you could move these little meeple along the path, and each path would have these random encounters. Um, and we had these like cards that you would shuffle up and then put face down on each of the streets, and those cards represented the encounter that you would meet along the way. And when it came to certain encounters,
Wait a
for
second, is
example,
that the sort of the inspiration for how the events work during the thing?
exactly, everything, literally all the game mechanics go go back to that early phase where we were mocking up a tabletop version of the game. And so when you asked earlier, was it tabletop or also like pen and paper role playing? It's a weird mix of both. Are you very familiar with the Fate RPG system?
I am
Fate core
familiar with
system?
it, not intensely familiar with it.
hmm It's a so for those who don't know, and I'm not by no means an expert on the system. It's a role playing system that lends itself very well to storytelling. Much it's much more I would say that it's much more focused on the storytelling aspect of role playing rather than the number crunching aspect of it, right? So the game, the mechanics of Fate and its dice are more or less. It lends itself to propelling the player forward on what's happening with the story. And so you roll these four dice, and depending on the number that you get from that, you match it against the difficulty level of the encounter that you have. And there are I don't know, like maybe four or five. People are gonna like crucify me for this later if I get it wrong. But essentially, there are four or five tiers of difficulty levels with varying degrees of success, right? So if you get an overwhelming success, you not only successfully complete your action, you complete it with a flourish and you get a point, and you can use that point later to take extra actions. Or you can just get like a success and just pass it, or you can get a fail and then a critical failure, things like that, right? So, in the early days, we had we used this system for the combat encounters, but also the strange encounters and traps. So, whenever you encountered a trap, the trap would have a certain difficulty threshold you would have to overcome. We would roll the dice, and then you would either fail or succeed to a certain degree. Same thing with every move in combat, and also every strange encounter you had on the street. So if you encountered this little girl who wants chocolate or candy, and then you had to answer originally, there were some penalties involved with that. That ended up becoming randomized.
That was the thing
Rather,
I was not entirely clear on actually for some of the events, was whether your stats actually had a major influence on some of them, if they were randomized. Because things
hmm
like the chocolate and candy one, I was like, I'm pretty sure this is random.
yeah, yeah. It ended up we won it one of the encounters to be something that was out of the hands of the player, right? Something that you really couldn't customize your team to overcome. And so that became kind of the storytelling aspect of the game design. Are you familiar? If you're familiar with FTL, there are certain cases where you get a distress beacon, and it's like, do I send somebody onto this ship, or do I make a deal with these people? Or there are different scenarios that you may encounter, and you're kind of depending on what you do. At the mercy of the game's random factor when it comes to that.
Though,
So we actually had some inspiration from FTL for
though
those
in
particular
FTL's
encounters.
defense, you can get like outcomes that no matter what are good if you have like a proper setup of either equipment, dudes on the ship, or whatever. So there's like
Yes.
the options that are maybe good, probably bad, but there's
Hmm.
also guaranteed good factors, and you can tell which one those good factors are if you have the right equipment. And I think that was the thing about the encounter scenario was I wasn't always clear what was the stat it was necessarily going to run off of.
Oh, there's no stat. It
Oh.
doesn't run on any stat. So
Oh god, they're all just like random?
there's story. There's You can kind of consider them story encounters. That was our main idea behind it. So even if there are two choices, there are sometimes 6 or 8 different outcomes
I
that can
noticed
happen.
that, and I wasn't sure if it was
Yeah.
tied to like the stats my character had going in or the specific type of character they were, which is why like after I got bitten hard by a bunch, I would mostly skip a bunch of them for the sake of not getting crippled by several failures in a row because that's a run ender.
uh, yeah. And we tried to balance it so that there's an even number of positive and negative things that can happen to your character. Um,
Oh, just
Sounds like you had a
RNGesus
bad run.
sometimes. Yeah, RNGesus does not bless me all the time, and so I
Yeah.
gravitated more towards elements that I had a distinct sense of control over and could predict. And
I see. Yeah.
I mean, that was the same way I approached FTL. I'm not good at it. Of FTL and Into the Breach, I far prefer Into the Breach. It resonated with me 100% more, but FTL, the way I did tackle it was I usually would try to fix up my stuff to provide more consistent results
Hmm.
altogether.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting aspect of game design when you think about it. Like, there are ways that you think the player's going to respond to stuff, and then there's the way they actually respond to things, right? So
If you
there's
don't mind
definitely a
me
lot.
asking, like,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
then what was the most difficult aspect involved in, translating these board game aspects, these nebulous like aspects into the video game?
Balancing, like anytime you create any kind of game with numbers involved behind the scene, it it all comes down to balancing it in a way that um, players enjoy. But not just that. But here's the thing: it's not just something that players enjoy. It has to lend itself to the game design as well. So in the early days, we wanted the game to be punishing. We wanted it to be super difficult, and I think we kind of achieved that goal a little too much. But especially when we first released,
I remember
um,
those days.
yeah, a lot of veterans do. The game's a lot easier now, but the thing was, we soon realized some aspects of the random RNG were just a bit difficult for people. For example, how often campsites uh, propped up or appeared, and what the likelihood of people finding them were. If you really played very strategically, you could make it through the entire the entire game with some, by making some very difficult decisions. But what we quickly realize is people don't really play like that. So that's why we actually incorporated the base camps between neighborhoods, so that people would always have a dedicated spot where they could use items and things like that. That was an example of an element that made it into the game after we started watching how players interacted with the game. We actually did months of QA and stuff on our end, trying to balance and get things just right. But there are only certain things that you can learn once the game's like out there in the wild, and you can really see how people, what's frustrating to people, what elements they enjoy, what elements could be tweaked just a little bit better, right?
Fair. You've mentioned like a lot of it with balancing, and now you folks have undergone a large amount of updates since the game's release. Like there was times where they were like weekly, and for some of them were pretty big. So, just how important has the community's feedback been for the direction the game has gone, and has it changed a lot from your vision of the game?
Um, I would say no, so. Anytime you're doing any kind of update, like the fine balance that you want to strike is that you want the game to be what you meant it to be, but you want to iron out the kinks. You want to iron out some aspects of the game. What we focused on was looking at things that would significantly improve the quality of the player's experience. I'll give you a few examples. In the early days, when people were hiring comrades, they just saw the comrade's portrait and name and class, and that was it. And we thought, okay, that in our own playthroughs and stuff, we just thought that was sufficient, and we didn't want to bombard players with more information than they needed to have. Turns out players really want to know exactly what the stats of their characters are before they hire them. Yeah, so that was just like one of those like little quality of life updates that we soon realized were important. We incorporated a lot of little things like that into the game. There are also a few other minor aspects. This was much earlier in the game's development. For example, the way that traps revealed themselves, we saw like small nuances, and just simply how the text would appear on the screen and stuff like that, with how players knew or didn't know, like what the outcome was. Very small nuances like that can actually have a big impact on what the player knows about your system. And those are things you can really only learn from watching a massive amount of people play. Other aspects that we kind of incorporate into the game were the ability to speed up the combat. So you can actually fast forward combat and traps and things like that. I know you had some input on that. And then,
I believe the only other bit of input I'd mentioned on it was currently it is a button toggle. If there was a way to just permanently set it to fast forward as an option in the settings, I'd appreciate it, especially for traps. Because I just, they're my personal, like, they're my bane.
Your personal bane. Yeah. So in terms of player feedback, though, I mean, it was really important. I don't think that we changed the game fundamentally. I think we were able to put our ears to the ground, listen to what aspects of the game needed some fine tuning. We focused especially on those things. We focused a lot on trying to tone down any game changing effects of RNG. So it was not our intention, for example, in the early days, for RNG to make or break a campaign. And we wanted to change that aspect. So we incorporated the base camps between neighborhoods, things of that nature. And a lot of it, even until now, is just fine tuning the enemy stats. and stuff like that. Unfortunately, we had a much shorter development cycle. The game was being worked on for about I'd say a year and a half, and there are four of us. And then for a game of its scope, you quickly learn that how difficult balancing becomes when you have such a large game with so many varieties of enemies and characters, and trying to make it work. So that has been its own little challenge.
So currently, I mean, the game, there's still stuff coming down the pipeline, as I recall. Is there any particular community suggestions you're still looking to implement?
We have looked at, for a lot of the bigger game mechanics oriented suggestions. We're kind of like we're still mulling over those. Most of the community suggestions that we like are more related to potential DLC projects, extra quests. I know that there's a way that people specifically like to experience New Game Plus, in which they bring over all their items from the previous quests. And as a developer, I totally agree with that. I would like to do that as well. Unfortunately, hindsight's 2020. You start working on a project, and then you get pretty far along with development, and then it becomes much more difficult to implement later on down the line when you're like, oh crap, like we should have, built this from the ground up with New Game Plus in mind. And so those are things that I think, like in the long term, we'd really like to have a proper New Game Plus where you can bring all your notes, and you can already bring your costumes, but bringing your equipment and stuff like that back into the new game would be ideally something that we implement in the future. But I don't know when we'll be able to do that.
Admittedly, the notes sort of pained me because I was sort of hoping they'd carry over like the costumes.
Yeah. And that is, something that we've addressed in our next game, the Coma 2. We're going to have it so that your notes do carry over as you build out the lore. So there's a bunch of little things like that. Since we are quite a small, inexperienced team, that you get a certain way along with a game's development, and they're just these kind of minor details you kind of overlook, and it's like, once you play through the entire thing or watch a bunch of people play through, and then you see what they kind of want, it's like, that would be genius to implement. Oh crap, it's like so much more difficult to implement now. So it takes a little bit more work, but it's definitely something we're interested in.
So, is there anything that didn't make into the game that you really wanted that you haven't covered already? Just if it's story, characters, or even just additional ways to customize them.
There was one potentially huge aspect that didn't make it into the game, which was a romance system. And
oh man, we could have romanced Mahoram.
Oh yeah, totally. This was something we talked about for a long time, that we really wanted to implement in the game, but we wanted to do it right. We didn't just want it to be like, you bring this guy gift, and then like, now he's your BF, whatever. We wanted to have like a kind of really deep system where over the course of the campaign, you're building a relationship with a specific characters, and then developing an intimate relationship with one. That's something that we looked into. We were really interested in implementing, but due to time constraints and some other difficulties, we just really didn't feel like we could do the system proper justice. So unfortunately, we never got around to it. But I think that's something we will definitely do next time around. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe we might revisit the idea as a DLC.
The romance DLC.
Yes.
slay
We
monsters,
can
and go
call
on
it
dates.
Vambraced.
Wow. Um, damn it, Bray's just like, how do I make shitty puns for this?
Yeah. Sorry.
Thaw the frozen hearts of the people of Icenaire. There we go. There we go. Just thaw the frozen hearts of the people of Icenaire.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's fucking Shrimp is gonna hate both of us.
Warm this cold soul.
So,
Okay.
one of the things here is when you clear the game, if you already mentioned this, like there's no new game plus, but there is a stinger. There's a clear hint that there's more to come. Is that meant to be sort of like a sequel hook, or is that meant to be related to possible DLC, or was that just like a note that you wanted to end the game on?
No, we're definitely planning a sequel to the game. And I've already got some of the story worked out. And I'm actually really excited about where the story is going to go. I think players that have played through the entire campaign are going to be pleasantly surprised by how the next story picks up. And
I mean, I was assuming we were heading off to the desert, to be fair. Because it's mentioned a lot.
Mhm. It's without saying too much, I will definitely say that you'll be able to see how a lot of things continue forward, and yeah, I think no matter which ending you got, you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Question then. So, when someone mentions, oh, hey, proper sequel, usually, a certain number of questions entail. So, first off, I'd just like to know, like, how similar it would be mechanically. Would we expect more complexity in regards to the characters, the classes, their kits, and the way to advance?
Yeah, I think the next time. Well, keep in mind where we haven't even begun. We haven't even started a page in the game design document for this, but I think next time around we want to keep this more. We want to have a tighter cast of characters, and so I think the intention would be to build a story around a very tight knit group of characters. Maybe up to 10 different characters, and it would explore their relationships. They would be your party members, and rather than having the random class system, you would have these team members that you're growing with and improving along the way. So I do think that there will be some added complexity into the character advancement, but we would probably jump back a bit from the current system. Now, I can't say that this is that this is a solid plan. It's just some ideas that we've been mulling
in which
over.
case, would it be a similar game genre-wise? You're talking about a smaller cast that you're focused on specifically building relationships. Things like roguelikes with a lot of permadeath can sometimes make that very hard to get attached to characters.
Yeah. It's a really, we are exploring ways that we're going to approach this. At its heart, Vambrace was definitely a roguelite game, and we love that aspect of having this punishing element where characters die and they're gone for good. And we're still considering what aspects of that we would bring over. It was already challenging enough to have like a kind of epic story with a kind of pretty much a linear story with a central main character and still be a roguelike experience, right? So we had to design around the fact that Avelia was not an expendable unit, in the game.
Trust me, it broke my heart once because I had a boss like on their last legs, no minions, and they just focused Avelia down into pudding while everyone else was doing pretty fine. I was like, okay, she'll just get knocked out. She just pops back in the med bed. Nope. Nope. Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Fuck.
So I mean, it was a design decision we struggled with. We wanted a big story. We wanted a story that unfolds through the eyes of one character, but you know, we wanted something that worked, but also we wanted people to experience, you know, permadeath with their other characters, as an element of kind of punishment on the campaign for how tough it could be, how tough it could get. Also to kind of instill this real sense of, in the earliest days of the game, when you made it through a campaign, there was this real sense of relief that washed over you when you returned back to Delark from your campaign. That's what we were striving for. I don't know how much people feel that way with the current version of the game, but we wanted to kind of create the real feeling of what it would be like to set out on an expedition and then make it really far and have that feeling of not really wanting to go back and just pushing a bit further, and then the real relief of achievement when you made it through. And I think that's at the core of what we want to do with the series. It doesn't have to always be about permadeath. It doesn't always have to be about character classes and stuff like that.
But the survival aspect and a lot of the other things are
central. I think that if we can strike that really fine balance of evoking those feelings from the player of, I'm about to set out on this thing, and then you're on the mission and really feeling that achievement of progressing further and further and deeper into enemy territory, or the loss of having to go back. I think if we can do that, I would like to keep that element of it going.
Other than that, I suppose I might as well ask, were you intending on carrying it forward, considering the name itself, Vambrace, sort of ties to the titular character? Would the sequel be a direct sequel following our main character, or would it be addressing other characters? And would there be other characters like Mahoram or other people possibly carrying forward into it? Which I suppose would mean, would anything we did in the prior save file for the first game carry forward to the second?
So definitely there will be returning characters to the story. I'm not going to say too much about the main campaign because I don't want to spoil
that's fair.
anything. But I will say one other thing. I think no matter which ending you got, you're going to be really pleased with how it continues forward. So I can let people speculate as to what that means. And then definitely you're going to see some beloved characters returning, and a lot of really cool, very cool new faces. So I think one aspect about Vambrace that kind of sets itself apart is I think a lot of people love the characters. They love the characters that they meet, their stories and stuff like that. It's going to have an even tighter focus on character development this time around, and those interpersonal relationships. So that's what I would love to focus on with this next one.
Okay. Partly I was curious, like, how big of an impact the ending would possibly hold. Especially because since you're technically, like, making new save files, it's like, do I need to make a save file for each ending just so I can muddle around for maximum stuff? Also, will I be able to carry forward my costumes from the first game to the second?
Vambrace is continuing the story. So you will see what happened. Like the story will continue forward from what you got.
Oh. Okay. So I've asked like a bunch of my questions. We actually have a couple of community questions as well for this interview. Specifically, Alma Vanilla wanted to know a couple things. First off, is there any further plans on fleshing out the events that led to Icenaire's ruined states? And is there any plans on including special companions, either as quest or DLC rewards?
On the quest and DLC rewards, we've discussed that, and right now we're already in development of the Coma 2, so it will definitely be something that once things are a bit settled with that, we might explore some tactful DLC that we can release that with potentially new characters or story, new quest lines and stuff that can be explored. That's a possibility. Can't promise anything right now. It all comes down to time for us and how well we can manage it. But what was the first question?
Okay, Alma's first question thing was technically part of the same question, but it's just like they had wanted to know specifically like if there were plans on further fleshing out the events that led to Icenaire's ruined state. Now I know a lot of that is sort of underlined and hinted at through a few of the side quest areas, especially if you read the lore, but I think they're
Mm-hmm.
specifically curious about playing through its downfall as well as
Mm-hmm.
just a focus on more combat quests and also being able to, I guess, hang out with some of the NPCs and companions who hang out through the game in the same manner that we do near the end of the game because reasons.
Okay. Yeah. I think, that's a really great question. We've actually looked at either doing that potentially in a visual novel format. Just telling like kind of the prologue of the story. We've also, it could be a potential like DLC that we explored. Not going to promise anything, but it's something that we've considered. And I think it would make a compelling story all into itself. Just everything that led up to that and what happened. There's a huge backstory. For example, between the four shades before they became shades, Braun, Severson, Hilda's brother.
Thing.
Yeah, the kind of civil war that erupted between the Crown Loyalists and the Crimson Reign. There's a huge backstory with that. There's also a reason all the factions are gathered in this city. It wasn't just a huge, diverse city, but all these important leaders were there for a diplomatic event with the king, which is why the Green Flame struck when they did. So there's a compelling story there for why all these leaders were in one place at the same time and then had to escape and survive underground with each other. So I do think that there's a compelling story there to be explored. Definitely more than enough material.
So we might
work
get to
with.
see a visual novel-y type update potentially if you guys get time.
It could be one of two things. It depends on how much time we have. If it's something where it's just a story we want to tell, it could be in just a visual novel format. If it's something where like we have that extra time and we can devote some resources to it, we might build it as a proper campaign. So we'll see. But that won't be in the near future.
Okay. I just was like, man, the best thing would be playing it as the Green Flame, completely ruining everyone's day. I'm pretty sure some people would be like, oh man, I get to be Feroza. Justice.
Yeah, she would definitely be an important character in that event, and you would get to see more of her. So that would be my particular, the key character that I'm most interested in exploring a little more.
That was actually like when they mentioned this question, I was like, because I sort of wanted to see more of like, I guess, the villain. I like following the villains sometimes and their development, their motivations, and the like. And it's always sort of interesting to see them at play.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was my interest in like when I saw this question for like the downfall of the city.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think so, and I think the Green Flame have their own very interesting motivations for, and in some weird ways, some very legitimate motivations for what they're doing in the city. They
Yeah,
kind of
especially
messed
if
up
you read the
Icenaire
lore.
really badly. Yeah, they've messed up Icenaire badly, but Septus's intentions span beyond that small city, which he kind of saw as a necessary casualty on the road to instituting something much more important. So
He was a little unhinged though,
he
just a
was,
little, which
yeah.
is also why I was curious about his downfall specifically, as
Hmm.
well. I will say though, another question, and I imagine you've probably gotten this a few times, is I'm a Vanilla also wanted to know if there's any plans for things like merch, lyric plushies, posters, the whole sort of thing. Like any
Hmm.
chance of magical girl lyric plushies?
I'll have to talk to our publisher about that. It's really interesting. We're going to be releasing the game on console uh, in August.
Yeah, the
So
Switch, is it not?
it's going to
Or
be on all major consoles: PS4,
nice.
Xbox One, and Switch. I'm looking forward, especially to getting my hands on a Switch version. And I think we'll really be able to consider our options after that. Really see. It's kind of a second breath, for Vambrace to finally get into the hands of console players, and especially with the benefit of all the hindsight that we've had from the community's feedback and stuff like that. So they're going to get the most up to date version of the game. So we'll see how the community responds. We'll see how players respond, and then if it makes feasible sense. Definitely. I do know that for the physical versions of the game already in Japan, we're launching with a pretty cool art book and some other cool things. So there's that. But no plans for plushies or anything like that just yet. We'll see.
Just yet.
It's something that we
Um,
want
fair,
for sure.
fair. So, do you have a favorite memory of watching someone play your game? Either of them playing well, entertainingly.
Oh man, can choose the Coma or Vambrace? My
Both? You can choose both.
I was watching my most distinct favorite memory of watching somebody play my game. I was watching uh, this chick play the original Coma, and just screaming and being almost in tears when Miss Song came out and started chasing her, and she was frantically trying to survive. That was just her visceral reaction to her first encounter with Miss Song was hilarious, and I'll never forget. I'll never forget that. For those people who don't know, the Coma is a survival horror adventure game. So that was a lot of fun. With Vambrace, these Vambrace is such a slow burn game. So you really have to dig the personality of the person that you're watching, and play the game, and how they're interacting with the story. There was another Twitch streamer. I don't go on Twitch a lot, so I just end up watching random people play here and there.
Man, I feel
But
super proud that you crashed my stream then.
yeah, I was I saw it on. I saw it. Oh, what's this? I saw it on Twitter, and then ended up tuning in. So thanks for running the stream.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was watching this lady. What is her name? Glitchy TV. Glitchy TV. The thing is, she was streaming when I was working late at night. So, and then I could just watch the stream on my television. And so I would just have it tune into it and watch it in the background. But I love watching her responses, especially to some big story reveals and stuff like that in the game. That was fun. So with a game like Vambrace, since it's such a slow burn, narrative driven game, the joy comes more from seeing how people react to the key twists in the story. Exactly. So.
Oh, oh. I'm a very chill person, but some games, when there's certain twists, I'm just like, you bitch.
What comes to mind?
Okay. The betrayal was like a twin middle fingers, a fucking how dare you, and everything that followed that as one example from your game. Another one that actually got me recently, and I was so incredibly pissed about, was Wandersong. Actually, the hero, I just
Wandersong.
came to hate them so badly, and the hero is not the protagonist of the game. The hero is the hero. The protagonist is Bard, and just the sort of weird, almost misanthropic like hubris of that character and everything they stood for and the way they'd go about achieving their goals. Just like I sort of got the character, could sort of understand it, but just was like, you are everything I hate. Everything I hate. And damn it, I'm looking forward to foiling you.
I'm checking it. I'm gonna add that game on my wish list now. I'm checking it out.
It's very good narratively, and if you're into those big twists, that'll be a thing. I'm gonna stop plugging other games though during our interview, even though.
No, it's like, I think it's fun, because like I say, once I became a developer, I started playing games a lot less. Some people ask me like, who are your favorite designers these days, and what are they working on? And it's a sad admission I have to make, but I'm much less informed of what the development community's working on these days now more than ever. Even despite the fact I'm going to these events like Indie Mega Booth and the Mix. I mean, I get to be in one space with a bunch of people all in one night, but after the event's over, it's back to crunch, back to dev, and don't get to spend a lot of time hearing other people's suggestions and stuff. So it's always nice to hear what other people are playing.
Which actually, though, speaking on like devery bits, and you've already mentioned the prior game, the Coma, and currently you guys are working on a sequel to this game, namely the Coma 2 Vicious Sisters.
Yes.
I was actually curious if you'd be willing to just talk about it a bit and share about what it will carry forward from its predecessor, as well as just how you're choosing to innovate on the formula you already set up.
Yeah. Okay, a few things. I'm so excited about this game because I really think it is a real evolution over the Coma cutting class. So a few things. First of all, the Coma 2 Vicious Sisters is a continuation of the original story, but it's not a game where you have to have played the original story to jump into this. So we wanted this to be just as great for somebody who's completely new to the series as somebody who is playing this game after the first, right? People who played the first game will be rewarded with, seeing certain characters returning and stuff like that.
Lore.
And cameo appearances. Yes, lore getting more fleshed out. This game is the narrative in this time around is much tighter than the original, much more fleshed out, more interesting hijinks and characters getting involved. You take on the role of Mina Kim. She's Young Ho's childhood friend. And whereas the first game was confined just to the grounds of the high school, this one goes beyond the high school and into the neighboring district. So you're going to be exploring different locations, from Sewa High School to a police station, an abandoned subway station, a hospital, things like that. So you'll actually be going into the district proper.
So you're just like checking off the list of all the places you shouldn't go in a horror movie.
Exactly. But there's a really cool narrative that's unfolding here with Mina, and one aspect that I think any horror fan really loves is that, whatever horror slasher film you're watching, your character or the hero or heroine always begins in this very pristine state. But when you're at the end of the movie, they've been slashed up, beat up, and have basically clawed their way, out of hell to survive, right? And I think that that's something that's an element of like horror films that we really love. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could incorporate that into this game as well? So you have Mina, who's entering this strange, shadowy version of her waking world, where everything's just a little bit twisted, a little bit darker, and very dangerous. And as you progress through the game, you will make these key decisions that you will have these key survival encounters that you will either pass or fail. And failing them will get health permanently knocked off on your character and make the game more difficult as you go along. And it'll also affect your appearance, get you more bloodied up and stuff. Till by the end of the game, if you fail every event, you can really look like, somebody from one of those slasher films has just been through like hell and back.
In theory, though, if you're really good and perfect playthrough, you can just walk through completely pristine.
Yes, ideally, if you prepare for every single thing, you can do that. But that said, the Dark Songs mechanics this time around are quite different. So it's kind of like your health meter comes into play when you're exploring the environment, right? And you're encountering environmental hazards, and that's hitting your health meter. But Dark Song is completely different, because when she catches you, it's like you're dead. It's kind of like a 2D Alien Isolation in that aspect.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. No, I enjoyed Alien Isolation, and it was pretty vicious. There's the rare times where it wouldn't kill you because you shot a flamethrower point blank in its face right before impact.
Right.
But mostly you were super fucking dead, even in the points where you didn't see it at first, and then it just chomps your head off
Yes.
while you're getting
Yes.
up.
We wanted Dark Song to evoke a real sense of fear in the player this time around. A real sense of dread, knowing that doesn't matter if you're completely pristine, by the end of the game, when she's chasing after you, you've got to like figure out how to get away from her. So that's something
Fight never becomes an option. It is always flight.
Yes, always flight.
Okay, that's distinctly interesting. So that's the pristine versus damage thing is mostly your capacity to navigate the world itself, which I imagine there is going to be instances where you're having to navigate and deal with environmental hazards while also avoiding them, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that there's going to be that aspect. You're going to be exploring. There's that adventure game element to it that we've improved upon from the last game, and you'll be exploring all these different variety of environments and trying to avoid the dangers in there.
Will you be more mobile?
More mobile?
Yeah.
Like in which sense?
Speed, as well as just like, will you be just sort of like walking back and forth, or will you be able to do stuff in adventure game aspect of like, say, hopping and grabbing up onto a ledge if you need to? Like, is it a 2D just sort of going back and forth across the screen, or how much are you adding? Like, are you adding a dimension of verticality to it?
I wouldn't say that there's a large dimension of verticality to it. There are different We have varied the ways that you can hide and the effectiveness of the hiding. We've also completely rebalanced the way that running works in this game, and your stamina meter, things like that. So that should provide an interesting little challenge to players.
Is that also going to be impacted by your health state?
I don't think so, actually. I think
Thank God.
Yeah. I think your stamina is just good. You know, like, yeah.
Thank you, because they're just like, oh man, because I mean, being more glassy as things go on, that's dealable.
But we did have something where you lose breath. You're like out of breath, and then you couldn't run for an extended period of time. But we're still working with that. That's one of those things, about game design. It's like, is this a good idea, or is this just going to be something everybody universally hates? We don't know. So still fine-tuning some things.
Is there anything else you'd like to address about the Coma 2 while we're at it?
Not much. We are planning to run a kind of open source or open access campaign to promote the game, and we've got some really cool stuff lined up for that. So maybe I'll give you some more information when that finally launches. Some things are still a bit up in the air, but yeah, other than that, we expect the game to be finished toward the end of this year.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
We were like working on it simultaneously with Vambrace. And so, yeah.
In that case, since we're slowly winding things down, is there anything you want to share with the audience right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've got a lot of really cool stuff in the works. Lucky for us, we, as a very small team, we're just a group of guys that really feel like we're working on the projects that we love. So we've always got something in the pipeline, something that we're working on. The Coma is our next thing. We already got an idea for the next game as well after the Coma 2. So very excited to just be like slowly introducing these things as we get more work on them done.
All right. So, yeah, first off, I'd just like to thank you, Tristan. It was really cool, again, they could provide me so much time for this interview. And also just answer all these questions, of which there was a heck a ton.
No worries. Thanks for playing the game.
Oh, yeah. It was a hard-fought battle, but I got to the end. I am looking forward to a few more of those quality of life updates as I delve into the my second going to totally be the Queen of Shades ending.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, for the viewers, you folks can buy or wishlist Vambrace Cold Soul on Steam. For news, you can find these folks at Devespresso G on Twitter. You can also find them at Devespresso Games. That's their website. It's just Devespresso Games. www.
Mm-hmm.
There is also a discord.dg/F3RGUSQ. Whatever. The link's in the description. Also, you can find them on Facebook at Devespresso.
Oh,
Did I miss
about
anything?
the Discord. Also discord.gg/Devespresso. I took your advice and we got yeah, I got that check mark.
Ha! Yeah, I may have been like, yeah, you're like an actual game company as opposed to
literally. I took your advice and went to the site and was following your instructions. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Maybe one day they'll actually verify me. I don't think so, but I mean, maybe. Is there anywhere else you'd care to send people though?
No, just I think you covered it all. Yeah, basically devespresso.com. Head Up Games is our publisher. They're based in Germany. Just a very fantastic group of people. I would recommend checking out some of their stuff and their website. And we also have a partner based in Japan, Chorus Worldwide, and we'll be distributing Vambrace through Konami. So that's very exciting news for us. So I would also recommend checking out their website as well, Chorus Worldwide.
Alrighty. In which case, with all that said and done, I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. If you folks agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or our Monday tabletop RPG content, I mean, you might actually be interested in that, Tristan. Hit the subscribe button and the little bell so you know where there's a new release. There's also a Discord, which you can click the link in the banner or the description. We don't have a fancy custom Discord thing like the Devespresso guys, but it's still a nice, cozy community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor. And make sure we continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description plus banner for them links. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.